Hi, everyone, and welcome back to our series on the historical context of Daniel. This is going to be session 2. Last time we talked about the pre-exilic period, the period when the Jews were still living in Jerusalem, and the siege of Jerusalem by King Nebuchadnezzar, and then the period of beginning the exile. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the Babylonian Empire and what it was like to live in Babylon. So, Babylon was founded in the year 1763 BCE, before the Common Era. So, that was almost 200 years before the time of Jesus. And it was founded by Hammurabi after he won a battle against the king of Larsa and took control of the entire lower Mesopotamian plain, which, of course, was very important because those life giving waters, the Tigris and Euphrates, were there. And those were used to maintain the empire. So here on this slide, you can see a head that is believed to represent Hammurabi, and then there is a picture of a stele that contains the Code of Hammurabi. And the Code of Hammurabi is from 1758 BCE, and it is believed to be one of the first written law codes. It is a set of 282 laws, and it was posted on tall stone columns called stelae, and they were placed in prominent locations in towns so that any literate person could come and read them. And the laws took a general philosophy of an eye for an eye, that kind of thing, and they were considered a major step in the evolution of civilization, since it was one of the first attempts to create a systematic law code that was in place across an entire empire, not just kind of a town by town understanding of how people ought to behave. So then in 1240 BCE, the Assyrians sacked Babylon, and they took control of it until there was a rebellion in the 7th century BCE. So there was a time in the middle there that Babylon was under the control of the Assyrians. The year approximately 1200 BCE, we also get some of the most famous early literature, the Epic of Gilgamesh. It is one of the earliest literary works in the world. It's an epic poem about the king Gilgamesh, who was a king from the 3rd millennium BCE. And the themes of the epic include the search for immortality and the conflict between nature and civilization. So you can kind of see how people were struggling with ideas about nature, and how, as we build culture and civilization, how those two things come in conflict with one another. So this is a picture on this slide of a relief from the Epic of Gilgamesh that depicts Gilgamesh and a friend of his killing the demon who guards the trees in the cedar forest and taking control of them, making order out of the chaos of the forest. So between 721 and 703 BCE, the Chaldeans enter Babylonia, and they compete for the Babylonian throne. And then in 626 BCE, the Babylonians rebelled against their Assyrian rulers, and the Chaldean dynasty began under King Nabopolassar, which is not to be confused with Nebuchadnezzar, that we'll be talking about in a little bit. Nabopolassar was the first of the Chaldean rulers. So then in 612 BCE, another empire, the Medes, created an allyship with Babylonia, and they together worked to conquer Assyria and shifted the powers of the Middle East. So here you can see a map of the Babylonian Empire and the Median Empire that joined together to form one enormous empire. And then in 587 BCE, as we talked about last time, King Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylonia captured Jerusalem, and Judah became a province of Babylonia, and then the Jews went into exile into Babylon. So now here we have a depiction of King Nebuchadnezzar in one picture, and then the other picture is a brick of Nebuchadnezzar, which was used in all of Nebuchadnezzar's building projects. And So each building project had one of these bricks, and the inscription reads, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, who cares for Asaglia and Ezdiah, eldest son of Nabopolassar, king of Babylon. And Asaglia was the temple of the supreme god Marduk of Babylon, while Ezdiah was the temple of Nabu, the god of writing, in a neighboring city to Babylon. So the inscriptions are there to kind of give esteem to King Nebuchadnezzar. In 605 BCE, as a field commander of the Babylonian army, Nebuchadnezzar led a victory against the Egyptian army at Carchemish on the Euphrates River. And then after the death of his father, Nabopolassar, Nebuchadnezzar ascended to the throne of Babylon, and he brought many provinces under his control, including Judah, and he forced allegiance and the payment of tributes from all of these different regions. He brought in a lot of money for Babylon. So here's an image of what the Babylonian Empire would have looked like during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, the city of Babylon. The city of Babylon was enclosed by a great double wall and was bordered by the Euphrates River, so that helped to keep it safe too. So here, it's an artist rendering. It has the palace of Nebuchadnezzar. There is a ziggurat known as the Tower of Babel, but of course not the actual Tower of Babel, and the temple of Marduk, who was the supreme god of the Babylonians and the patron deity of the city of Babylon. Here is another famous piece of architecture from Babylon, the Ishtar Gate. It was constructed of baked bricks that were glazed and included reliefs of animals like the lion you see in the picture and serpents. And statues of the gods were paraded through the gates and down the processional way each year during the New Year's celebration. And there is an inscription on the Ishtar Gate, and I'm going to read the translation of that for you now. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, the faithful prince appointed by the will of Marduk, the highest of princely princes, beloved of Nabu, of prudent counsel, who has learned to embrace wisdom, who fathomed the divine being and reveres their majesty, the untiring governor, who always takes to heart the care of the cult of Asaglia and Ezdiah, and is constantly concerned with the well-being of Babylon and Borsippa, the wise, the humble, the caretaker of Asquilia and Ezida, the firstborn of Nabopolassar, the king of Babylon. Both gates of Imerk Eli and Naranet Eli, following the filling of the street from Babylon, have become increasingly lower. Therefore, I pulled down these gates and laid their foundations at the water table with asphalt and bricks, and had them made of bricks with blue stone on which wonderful bulls and dragons were depicted. I covered their roofs by laying majestic cedars lengthwise over them. I hung doors of cedar adorned with bronze at all the gate openings. I placed wild bulls and ferocious dragons in the gateways and thus adorned them with luxurious splendor so that the people might gaze on them in wonder. I let the temple, the highest festival house of Marduk, the Lord of the gods, a place of joy and celebration for the major and minor gods, be built firm like a mountain in the precinct of Babylon of asphalt and fired bricks. So basically, this is Nebuchadnezzar kind of bragging on all of his great and mighty work and the things that he's built and why he built them, because he couldn't tolerate that the gates and the temple that were previously there were not looking so good. So he decided that he needed to upgrade them, and he wanted everybody to know about it. So here now we have a rendering of the Hanging Gardens with the Tower of Babel, that ziggurat, in the background. And according to legend, Nebuchadnezzar was the one who built the Hanging Gardens for his wife when she was missing the gardens of her homeland, Media. And there are actually no references to the Hanging Gardens in Babylonian records, but many Greek historians refer to them. So it was considered to be one of the ancient wonders of the world. But there's very little in the archaeological record to indicate where the gardens were or what they looked like. The only record we have of them are from these Greek historians. So nobody's really sure. It's one of those mysteries of history that we may never figure out. So talking a little bit about the Israelites and the Jews at this time, Many of the elite of Judah were taken into exile to the city of Babylon, but some peasants were left in Judah, while others were spread across the entire Babylonian Empire. And there were a lot of Israelites from the northern kingdom, that one that was conquered by the Assyrians in 722 BCE, who were also scattered across the Assyrian Empire when Assyria was the dominant power. So here you can see two pictures of the Assyrian and the Babylonian empires. You can see the Assyrian Empire is in the green there, and then you've got the Babylonian Empire in the other picture that is completely highlighted in yellow. So basically, they are interested in that space between the Mediterranean Sea and is that the Persian Gulf, I guess, which is called the Lower Sea in the picture, and of course all those rivers which are life-giving in the desert. Nobody really is interested in going any further south than that because that's just all desert. The Arabian desert is not valuable to anyone. So this is the space that is completely part of the desired space, and therefore is often very contentious and often sought by people in power. So now you can see some of the gods of the Babylonians. They had several, and this is just a few of them. So we have Tiamat, who is the mother goddess, who was cut in half to form the earth and the sky in Babylonian understanding. And she appears in the Babylonian creation epic Enuma Elish. And then at the bottom right, we have a cylinder showing a battle with Tiamat. To the left there, we have Marduk, the supreme god of the Babylonian Empire during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, and he is the god of vegetation and judgment. And then we've got some other gods: Anu, the sky god and lord of constellations; Enki, the chief god of the city Eridu, god of wisdom and magic. We've got Nabu, the god of wisdom and writing, who is the son of Marduk. And Nabu is actually mentioned in the Bible in Isaiah 46:1 as Nebo, contrasting the power of God to the burden caused by idols, Nebo, that must be hauled around and don't actually do anything. So they are heavy, they're usually made out of stone, but they don't actually do anything. And in contrast to the God of Israel, who is not an idol, who is not made out of stone, and is actually there for and cares about the people. And the names of a lot of kings are derived from this Nabu. King Nabopolassar, King Nebuchadnezzar, and King Nabonidus are all derived from this name. And there on the top right, you can see a statue of Nabu. So a couple things about Babylonian culture that might be of interest to you. Astronomy and astrology were really important in Babylonian culture, and Babylonian astronomers invented the zodiac and used a calendar with 7 and 5 day weeks. And the Babylonian number system was based on the number 60, from which we derive our division of the hour into 60 minutes and the minute into 60 seconds. The legal system worked based on that law of Hammurabi, the idea that justice has to do with an eye for an eye. Crimes that were punished with the death penalty included theft, burglary, lusting after your mother, adultery, rape, and harboring fugitive slaves. Other punishments included being sent into exile, loss of various body parts, including limbs and eyes, and then most commonly fines, financial fines. So because of the exile into Babylon, the Jewish religion had a lot of changes. So it kind of evolved from the what you would understand to be kind of the ancient practice of worship of God into this newer understanding of it. At the death of King Josiah and the destruction of the temple, both the Mosaic covenant and the Davidic covenant were destroyed. So the Mosaic covenant was the covenant of the land, that the land would be given to them. And the Davidic covenant was the one where David, the line of David would last forever. And when the sons of Zedekiah were killed, that was the end of that. So the exiled Jews could not maintain their understanding of their relationship to God in the same way anymore. They had to rethink their theology. And so despite the political successes of Daniel in the stories that appear in chapters 1 through 6 of the book of Daniel, Jews who lived in exile did not have any political influence in real life, and they were fairly unnoticed among the different people living as foreigners in the Babylonian Empire. They were a small group, and even though they had different cultural ideas, so did most people, because there were lots of foreigners living in Babylon at the time. Even after the Babylonian exiles were allowed to return to Jerusalem many years later, many did remain in exile, especially in Babylonia, Egypt, and then Syria. And living in diaspora meant that many Jews were not able to participate in the festivals and rituals at the temple in Jerusalem, even after it was rebuilt. So over time, synagogues became the center of Jewish religion instead of the temple, and that, of course, exploded in terms of practice around the empire after the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, which we will get to later. And for Jews living in exile in Babylon, it was really difficult, if not impossible, to practice their religion. So they began to focus their religious practices on how they lived and on studying the Bible, the Torah, which is those first five books of the Old Testament. So here we have an image of the Jews being taken into captivity, which is a painting by Edvard Bendeman, and then there's a relief of Jews in exile. So here we have images of the stele of Nabonidus and then the fall of Belshazzar under Cyrus's invasion. So Belshazzar and Nabonidus both appear in the history of Babylon. Belshazzar appears in chapter 5 of Daniel. We'll get to that. But he was never actually a king of Babylon. He was instead the co-regent of his father Nabonidus, who was the last king of Babylon from 556 BCE until the Persians invaded and conquered Babylon in 539 BCE. Belshazzar ruled in his father's stead for about a third of his father's reign, because Nabonidus, who was the actual king, was spending all of his time in Arabia instead of ruling properly in Babylon. So that's why Belshazzar appears in Daniel 5 instead of Nabonidus, even though Belshazzar was never actually the king. Belshazzar is recorded in various tablets and letters in his trade dealings with a lot of different Babylonian families, and he also appears in records of his co-regency after Nabonidus' departure. According to legend, when the Persians invaded in 539, they diverted the Euphrates River to gain entrance into Babylon. So they moved the river, which had been there to protect the city, and they were able to enter into the city. And according to this legend, they found Belshazzar in his court, drunk and waiting for the invaders. So they didn't even try to defend themselves. So most of the events that are recorded in chapters 1 through 8 of the book of Daniel are all purported to have happened between the beginning of the Babylonian exile in 587 BCE and the invasion of the Persians in 539 BCE. The king in chapter 6 is called Darius the Mede, who ruled after Belshazzar's defeat. And the chronological notices for chapters 9, 10, and 11 place those visions in the time of Darius the Mede and then Cyrus, who is the first Persian king. King Nebuchadnezzar appears the most often in the first half of Daniel. He takes a major role in the stories of chapters 1 through 4. But none of the visions in chapters 7 to 12 claim to have occurred during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. Belshazzar, called King Belshazzar in the book of Daniel, appears in chapter 5, and in his first year of ruling when the vision of chapter 7 occurs, and in the third year when the vision in chapter 8 occurs. There are no specific kings discussed in the visions of chapters 7 to 12, but the lion with eagle's wings that is depicted there probably refers either to Nebuchadnezzar or to the Babylonian Empire as a whole. The prevalence of lion art in Babylonia gives a lot of credibility to this connection. Here you can see the Lion of Babylon depicted. The constant reminders throughout the stories about God's superiority over the Babylonian kings in the book of Daniel reminded the exiled Jews and future oppressed peoples who read the stories that although the kings of Babylon were very powerful, God was and is in control and will be with and eventually restore the people of God who remain faithful even in these kinds of adverse situations. So that's all we've got for the Babylonian period. Next time we will jump into the Persian period, and I look forward to hearing from you if you have any questions or comments, and if you are planning to join us this week for our Daniel Bible study, I will be really glad to see you then. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.